as espoused in the principles of sustainable tourism development, are essential for the sustainable growth and resilience of tourism in the region. As the region prepares for what experts have predicted to be an overly active hurricane season, and given the current and future impacts of climate variability and climate change, which are projected for the region, it is imperative that the regional tourism sector is equipped to adequately prepare for, respond to, and recover from climate hazards. Today's webinar will feature presentations from the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, and the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, CIMH. We will also hear from representatives of the Ministry of Tourism of Jamaica and the Bahamas Hotel and Tourism Association, who will share their experiences, successes, and challenges as it relates to tourism disaster emergency management. Good morning, everyone, and welcome again to today's webinar. It is my pleasure to officially begin this meeting and to welcome the first speaker, Mr. Neil Walters, Acting Secretary General and CEO of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, who will deliver opening remarks. Thank you. Over to you, Neil.
Hi, good morning, Amanda. I'm very sorry for my slightly tardy arrival. Had a little bit of a challenge, but nevertheless, I'm here. I want to say thank you to all of you who have taken the time to attend this, what I think is a very important and potentially beneficial webinar at the start of a period which happens every year, but based on what we're being told, has the potential year in, year on to be even have a much larger or stronger impact than it has had in the previous years. Nevertheless, we in the Caribbean and the CTO for sure have always prided ourselves on the ability to make our efforts to smile at every storm, as it were. So without further ado, let me just say a few remarks that we think are necessary and vital to not only this session, but looking at the sector overall. I wish to say welcome to all members who are CTO members and all stakeholders who are on this session, and I hope that it will be beneficial to you. As I said, I'm very pleased to welcome to you to this CTO and CHTA virtual learning session on climate and disaster preparedness. It's the first of two sessions, and it's really part of our efforts to provide information and support education and awareness to enhance tourism sector resilience to the various natural hazards which can impact the region. And especially in recent times, I'm sure we're very much aware of the fact that natural hazards happen with a certain level of randomness, which in some cases we really have to be constantly prepared, and there's no advance warning per se. Nevertheless, we are aware of the potential devastating impacts of climate hazards, notably hurricanes, tropical storms, and floods, which are more prevalent during the rainy season and coincide with this annual Atlantic hurricane season. Research has also shown that one of the more detrimental effects of climate variability and climate change is an increase in the frequency and severity of extreme weather events like the hurricanes and so on I mentioned. Hurricanes and other hazards pose a significant risk to lives, livelihoods, property and real estate investments, infrastructure and transport networks. The regional tourism stakeholders also have to confront issues related to cancellations and loss of business, substantial rehabilitation post effects, and the cost of those rehabilitation and business closure, as well as a negative image of the region in terms of safety during this time of the year. And I'm sure we're all very familiar with, especially that last impact. Preparedness actions are essential and a key first step to mitigate and reduce the impact of natural disasters. This includes proper disaster management planning, mobilizing emergency management committees, reviewing and updating as needed risk reduction and crisis communication plans. For the tourism sector in particular, there is need to ensure protocols are in place for the shelter and/or evacuation of visitors and staff alike. Equally important is the development of contingency plans and engaging in business continuity planning for the safe and efficient resumption of business and tourism activity. And this is compounded again this year by the uncertainty imposed by the ongoing, albeit reduced effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. A country's reputation and perceived image are one of its most valuable assets. And whenever there's a crisis of any kind, the situation can be made worse by the way it is handled. Effective preparation and well-coordinated management and response to disasters can significantly enhance a country's ability to bounce back and continue to attract visitors in the aftermath of a crisis. And I think it should make it very clear that effective preparation, as well as putting measures in effect on a timely basis, will also reduce the effect of misinformation, which can sometimes be just as negative, or in some cases even more negative. And we go back to the hurricanes of 2017 for an example, in terms of making sure you get ahead of the story, making sure you get ahead of what might be put out there by certain interests. In today's event, we will hear from experts who will present the hurricane season forecast for 2022 and share mitigation and preparedness strategies. We will also hear the experiences, key learnings, and best practices in disaster management from both the public and private sector perspective. I trust you will find the presentations informative and beneficial towards the review and updating of your own disaster risk management plans. In closing, I would like to make mention of two key resources developed by the CTO to support capacity building in disaster management. And they're namely the Multi-Hazard Risk Management Guide and the Risk Management Online course, and encourage you to refer to these and utilize these resources along with the relevant tools, checklists, and templates, and these address all phases of the disaster management cycle: preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. So I thank you all for making the time to attend today's webinar, which I hope will augment your own efforts in preparing for this annual season. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walters. And it is my pleasure to now welcome Mr. Frank Camito, Special Advisor and former CEO and Director General of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, to also deliver opening remarks. Over to you, Mr. Camito.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Neil, and thank you everyone for joining us today. This is always a part-time of the year where we have great trepidation, and having been through 16 hurricanes and major tropical storms, starting with Hugo in the Virgin Islands in the 80s, my trepidation has always been there, but it's also been reduced with preparation. So what we're about today, and then the follow-up session on the 30th of June, is all about helping to make sure we're better prepared for what's going on, and as a result, better able to manage what's going on. I just wanted to, let me pull this up real quick. Okay, great. Everybody sees my screen there, I would assume. Why tourism? I think sometimes we shortchange why we're so important as an industry in times of disaster. Despite some of the thinking out there, we recover fairly quickly, and we'll talk about that in a second. We have a redundant utilities infrastructure, particularly with the hotels, communications, water, electricity, sewage, food, beverage, ice, and a human touch. We've got temporary housing, which we do for affected employees, relief workers, visitors, and later in the realm of volunteerism. We're a channel for external support and appeal for support for relief, supplies, funds. We help to bring it in and so on. So our role, and then certainly external communications and public relations are critical, and the tourism industry, public and private sector stakeholders role in the call today play a key role in that kind of communications. And that's so critical to restore traveler confidence. So let's not undercut the incredible value, not only in our own readiness, but also the role we play in a broader economy. We're going to talk about that second. We've learned to recover faster, and that's not by chance. It's because we're better prepared and we respond more effectively as well. The World Travel and Tourism Council has done quite a bit of research on the effect of crises on recovery for the tourism industry. And over the past 20 plus years, if you look at the top line up there, they looked at a range of disasters and crisis situations. And if you look at the top line there, the average recovery period for various types of things, which much longer than what you see on the bottom line there. And that's not by chance. That's because we've become better adept at being ready and prepared, and then responding and recovering. And you can see this in the tourism industry, the various types of situations we've had to deal with in a crisis over the past 20 plus years, and how quickly from a visitor arrival impact that our percentages are able to return to and then exceed what they were prior to the crisis situation. And it happens fairly quickly, and that's because of our readiness. And the same thing, a little longer, according to the STR data, historical, a little longer on the occupancy side, but the rebound is certainly occurs. And here's some data that basically shows what happened with Bahamas, Puerto Rico, and St. Martin when they were hit 2 Cat 4s and then Dorian in the Bahamas, and how long it took to recover and rebound. And you can see that the rebound happens fairly fast. I mean, again, it's relative, but it does occur at a good clip. And those are months that you're looking at there to get to pre-incident levels. And here you see from the double whammy of the Cat 5s in 2017, in 6 months, Anguilla was, and you can see the countries where they were at, percentage of hotels were open. And then in 18 months from that major devastation that occurred from those twin storms, before they got back to higher levels. So the recovery is much better. It used to be 4+ years or so, 20 years ago, but now we've moved that. And we're seeing that with COVID as well, how quickly our industry has rebounded from COVID. But we have to be mindful, even if you're sitting here from Tobago and you basically say, well, I'm not in the hurricane belt. You are. You're geographically, you're not in the hurricane belt, but you're part of this Caribbean region, and the contagion effect it can have. In putting it in context, in 2017, with impacts of Irma and Maria, you can see in the yellow highlighted areas, the areas in red that were directly impacted, but the entire region was impacted. And that's why we have to all be in the game in some fashion, depending on what role that we play. In 2017, more than 70% of the region was not in the path of storms. Yet the hurricane resulted region-wide in an estimated loss of over 800,000 visitors, and then also over 11,000 jobs. So our role at CTO and CHTA was, and with all the individual destinations, the boards and ministries of tourism and the private sector organizations, hotel and tourism associations, was to help to rebound as quickly as possible, because we have some reputational challenges as destinations, as companies, and certainly as a Caribbean. So the Caribbean is a brand. We've got to be mindful of that. So in 2017, by example, with the unprecedented devastation that occurred in a handful of countries, half a dozen countries, primarily jurisdictions in the region, we undertook with CTO and CHTA collectively on some points, but also individually, communications and public relations efforts were mobilized to ultimately seize the opportunity for the region, because a crisis is an opportunity. And our efforts included hundreds of media interviews, press releases, and social media management outreach, training of nearly 1,000 travel agents and dozens of travel partners, online fundraising and a campaign that we put together. All of those efforts combined. And by the way, we undertook similar efforts over the past two plus years with COVID, which I think has contributed to the acceleration of the recovery and us being one of the fastest areas of recovery for tourism in the world. So did CTO and CHTA efforts help? Yes. Were they sufficient? No, we can always all do more and better. But when consumers were asked by our travel partner, Travel Zoo, in research in October of 2017, following the storms that hit the Eastern Caribbean primarily and Puerto Rico, will the Caribbean be open for business to accommodate guests in the peak winter season of 2018? In October, 26% said yes. But because of all of those advocacy and support and restoration efforts by industry and governments and so on, by January, that attitude changed to 71% saying yes. So why is that so important? It's not only important at the individual company and destination levels, but it's important to our broader economies because of the pervasive impact of tourism. Caribbean Development Bank estimates that the impact of a 1% drop on CDB member countries translates into 226,000 fewer visitors and $139 million in reduced visitor spending. That was just for a part of the 19 member countries at CDB. But if you extend that CDB study to a 1% drop in arrivals Caribbean-wide, it's an estimated impact of 300, just 1% drop in hotel room in visitor arrivals. In 1%, 362,000 fewer visitors and over $300 million in reduced visitor spending. So it's a pervasive impact. I want to leave you with basically, and you'll get this as a takeaway, I'll send it to all the attendees, but basically here's some of the online resources that we have at the CHTA, with the CHTA Knowledge Center. The link is at the bottom there, but you can see a range of tools and information that you can draw from to be able to be better prepared. And no matter how prepared you are, if you don't go over it prior to the season and checklist and go through things, you could be losing an edge when an incident occurs. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Camito. Thank you very much to you and Neil for bringing these opening remarks and really setting the context for today's discussion. And with that, I now have the pleasure of inviting the first presenter, Dr. Nicole Greenwich, who is the Disaster Risk Management Specialist at the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA. Dr. Nicole Greenwich has a Ph.D. in Human Geography with an emphasis on disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation in seas. Nicole has 16 years of experience working in the field of disaster risk management and climate-related risk management. She specializes in integrating DRM and climate change adaptation, resilience, policy and plan development, also risk governance and stakeholder engagement. She leads the technical implementation of projects and programs on risk reduction at CDEMA, including on mainstreaming DRR, which is disaster risk reduction in key sectors, such as the tourism sector, and strengthening the national institutional framework for comprehensive disaster management. Welcome, Dr. Greenidge, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and good morning to everyone. I'm going to begin by sharing my screen. So again, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It is my pleasure to speak to you on the topic protocols and guidelines for tourism sector disaster preparedness. I am Dr. Nicole Greenwich, and I am the Disaster Risk Management Specialist at CDEMA. For today's presentation, I will provide a brief overview of the disaster context and damages in the tourism sector. I will not spend much time. Presenters before have done a very good job at outlining those areas. But then I will focus on preparedness in the context of comprehensive disaster management and resilience, and come home with the guidelines for preparedness and some take-home messages. CDEMA serves 20 Caribbean states and territories, from the Bahamas in the north to Suriname in the south. And Suriname at this time is facing severe impacts from flooding as a result of heavy rain showers in the interior and southern sections of the country, where various areas are still underwater. As of the 25th of May, the government of Suriname issued a presidential decree declaring the affected areas in the districts of Brokopondo and 6 other populated areas to be disaster areas. This is the current disaster that CDEMA, through the regional response mechanism, is responding to. And last year, we responded to requests from our states for external assistance for response and recovery to the global COVID-19 pandemic, the volcanic emergency in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the earthquake eruption in Haiti, and the flooding in Guyana. And some of those are shown on the screen along with a number of other events. There is no doubt that we are seeing an increase in the scope, intensity, and frequency of disaster events in the Caribbean region, and damages are also on the rise and are exceeding the size of the economy of our states. And I just also want to emphasize that we are experiencing also a change in the diversity, in the complexity of these hazards, and we are seeing cumulative hazard impacts. So, you know, although we are on the downward trend of the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, last year we would have faced volcanic eruption, we would have had hurricane season as well. So all of these come together to bring a new and complex implementation environment as to how we will handle disaster risk, how will we prepare for these kinds of disasters. I now want to zero in on climate-related hydrometeorological hazards, particularly hurricanes, the focus for today. And according to an IDB report, within the Caribbean sub-region, the negative impacts of extreme weather events over the years have been most vividly illustrated in the Bahamas. Now, the picture I have up here is a beautiful picture of the Bahamas, but you know, we do know of the devastation that the Bahamas has faced, and I don't want to get into another presenter's topic, but I want to highlight that they have faced 4 large hurricanes, 3 of which have been classified as Category 5 events, from Hurricane Joaquin, Hurricane Matthew, Hurricane Irma, most recently Dorian, and the damages from Dorian surpassed the loss and damages of the 3 previous hurricanes combined, estimated at $3.4 billion. And these events have taken an overwhelming toll on the tourism sector, the country's main engine of growth. And for many other Caribbean countries, this is the case. Tourism is the main engine of growth. According to the seasonal forecast by the Colorado State University, for the year 2022, the Atlantic hurricane season, which was updated last on the 2nd of June, we can expect a well above average Atlantic basin, where it is expected that there will be 20 named storms, 10 of which will strengthen to hurricanes, and 5 of these are predicted to be major hurricanes, Category 3 or higher. My distinguished panelists from the CIMH will elaborate more on this and also on the seasonal outlook. You may therefore be asking, with all of the damages experienced in the past and the forecast for a very active season, is there anything that you can do to make a difference? And the answer is a resounding yes. The hurricane season is already upon us, having started the 1st of June, but there are actions that can be taken to reduce the impact of damages and losses within the tourism sector. I want to hasten to say, though, that there are deeper systemic issues and resilience issues that must be addressed in the long term that will help to significantly reduce impacts related to laws, legislation, and planning. And as a region, we have articulated a comprehensive disaster risk management strategy and framework, as well as a Caribbean pathway to resilience adopted at the level of CARICOM. But I want to highlight the areas being focused on here that will assist the tourism sector, speaking to institutional strengthening, speaking to sector integration, which is the third one there, incentive programs, ensuring that hazard information is integrated into development planning and programming for the tourism sector. And then of course, having those more strategic plans. These are needed, but let's zero in now as it relates to preparedness. And this happens at a number of different levels. This is the Caribbean pathway to resilience, and you see the different areas that must be tackled, and this is relevant also for the tourism sector. So when we speak to preparedness, our focus is on organizing prompt and efficient actions of response and rehabilitation that can reduce to the minimum level possible the loss of human lives and other damages. Now, the tourism sector is organized into 8 subsectors. They're shown on the screen: accommodation, food and beverage, transportation, attractions, adventure tourism, events and conferences, travel, trade, and tourism sectors. For each subsector, we must be clear on what are the applicable protocols and guidelines. Now, the last time that I was here with you, which was in 2020, September, as we, March was COVID, came upon us, and our focus there was on COVID-19. But then I would have highlighted to you the different levels of implementation when we think about preparedness. So there are actions that must be taken at the strategic level, actions required at the tactical level, actions required at the operational level, those required at community and local level, and of course, employees and those employers, individual and family level preparedness is essential. This morning, I'm not going to speak to the individual, family, and community levels because we would have addressed that, and that information is available for you. I just want to focus in a bit more on the strategic and tactical level and operational level preparedness actions, So I left with you 3 action points the last time, and I don't know how far along we've come since 2020 in terms of ensuring that we have our tourism sector contingency plan, ensuring that we have our individual and family preparedness amongst employees, that is important for the business, as well as having tourism clusters that are functioning and integrated into the actual community where you're located, your contingency, the community's contingency plans. I want us to zero in here now in terms of just taking a deeper look at our readiness as it relates to contingency planning. Now, I want us to stop and think and ask the question, are our tourism emergency management committees and the associated emergency operations centers, are those functional? Because we need to ensure that we have those committees in place. The Ministry of Tourism will have a key role to play in that, as well as the different associations. So we need to have the committees functional. And then each subsector needs to have, and each entity within the subsector, whether you're working in accommodation as opposed to attractions, for your entity, do you have a multi-hazard risk assessment plan? So we want to ensure that you have these plans in place. And I just want to highlight what Mr. Walters would have referred to before, which is the guidelines that CTO has available to help you in developing these plans. And you can also reach out to your national disaster office. These plans are essential. I'm just going to pop down to this slide here to say that the template is quite straightforward, whereby you look at the hazard, you look at the level of risk and consequences, your risk reduction measures, responsibilities, and deadlines. Now, larger entities will likely have these in place, but for smaller entities, I just want us to make sure that we have those plans in place. As it relates to the third action, identifying and equipping the Emergency Command Center, the Tourism Emergency Operations Center. This is an action that will come along with at that higher strategic level. And so each entity, each ministry needs to ensure that these centers are set up along with the requisite national associations. Because these are fundamental to ensuring that we have the emergency response personnel list, that we have the equipment list, that we have the supplies list, as well as having the mutual aid agreements to ensure that we can have relief coming in and out of the country, of course, working with the National Disaster Office. But then, of course, at a lower level, at a more local level, you too should have your mutual aid agreements in place. So I just want to speak then to fundamentally the issue of having standard operating procedures. On the next slide, I highlight the steps to developing your standard operating procedure. And you can find these detailed in the multi-hazard contingency plan, the guide tool that has been developed for you through the CTO and with support of CDEMA and the Caribbean Development Bank. But we need to ensure this is fundamental for each hazard, that we know exactly what you will do, that you know exactly that employees and are aware as to what is necessary, that you test these operating procedures and make revisions. Very important. So if it's not done, I'm asking us to set a date, set a target to make sure that we can have this done and have the drills done. And if you've done it already, kudos to you. Excellent. I want to also highlight the importance, just to back up a bit more, of ensuring that we link into the whole national arrangement. So the role of the Tourism Emergency Management Committee, it has a coordinating role to ensure that, you know, there is at an operational level, a level of structure within the country, and that there's clarity in terms of the roles and responsibilities related to the tourism sector. And you see here how this operations center then comes out then from the Emergency Management Committee, whereby you have the different levels of damage assessment, relocation, evacuation. All of this will be organized for the country. And this now links then into the National Emergency Operations Center. So I wish to close then with a few remarks. And that is that often the biggest risk is not the crisis itself, but rather the preparation, management, and response. And it is therefore necessary to take a holistic approach to drive the societal resilience more broadly, and to ensure that those building blocks of trust, collaboration, communication, openness, empathy, honesty, and efficiency are in place. Take-home messages for us, therefore, will be, there is no doubt that we are seeing an increase in the scope, intensity, and frequency of disaster events in the Caribbean region, and damages are also on the rise and are exceeding the size of the economy of our states. However, the biggest risk is not the crisis itself. There are actions that each subsector can take to reduce damages to a minimum. There are broader systemic issues to be addressed, but there are preparedness actions that can help save lives and minimize the damages. We must prioritize ensuring that the Tourism Emergency Management Committee and the associated Operations Center, that those are operational. Each entity for each subsector must complete their multi-hazard risk assessment plans and must put in place and exercise the standard operating procedures for each hazard. Notwithstanding all of this, I just want to leave us with the point that we still need to prioritize our individual and family preparedness, as this is as important for as preparedness of the business. Thank you, and I wish you a very instructive seminar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Greenidge, for a comprehensive presentation. I now invite we have 5 minutes to address any questions from the audience following Dr. Greenidge's presentation. You're welcome to use the Q&A function. I also recognize that we are a bit delayed in terms of time this morning. So if there are no questions, I can move on to the next presenter. We do have at some point, all presenters will be able to have a Q&A, and this will be a moderated panel discussion. So there will also be an opportunity for questions and answers at that time. So with that, I would like to thank you, Dr. Nicole Greenwich, for making the time to attend and to share your experience with us. I see Mr. Camito would have raised his hands. Please proceed, Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question, because I didn't want Dr. Greenidge to get away without helping us on this matter. CDEMA has done some great stuff in advancing collaboration at the local level over the years. Many years ago, they helped us quite a bit in the Bahamas. And I'm just questioning, how do I, as a DMO or a Ministry of Tourism or Board of Tourism or National Hotel and Tourism Association, get greater buy-in in the kind of support for collaboration, which is so critical, because the recovery for the tourism industry is not just dependent on getting a hotel or whatever, a tourism business back up and running. It's depending on airlift, roads, basic utilities, getting supplies in, recovery supplies, relief supplies, damage assessment, dealing with displaced people, affected employees. I mean, there's a range of things that have to occur that get beyond the remit of just a board or a Ministry of Tourism that require other stakeholders to be involved. We've noticed at the regional level that some jurisdictions are right on the money and doing very well in that area, and others are challenged with it. So how do we as tourism stakeholders, public and private sector tourism stakeholders, help to affect that broader and greater collaboration, which is essential to recovery?
Thanks, Mr. Camito, for the question. I'd like to tackle that from the direction of the regulations and legislation within country. You know, these processes do take some time. And so we are, that is CDEMA, is working with the Red Cross, for example, the International Federation for Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, where we're establishing a working group to deal with these matters that cannot be dealt with while you're in the emergency. So for example, how do we ensure that across the board, we have the requisite legislation and customs regulations and things like that, that can allow for relief and supplies to pass in and out, also the humanitarian assistance to get into countries, because we have perennial, there's just issues that are persistent really, that need to be tackled at that broader level, as we deal with ports, we deal with customs, as we deal with immigration and all these issues. So we are setting up a working group to deal with the issue. Now, as it relates to how countries can be involved, the Bahamas, for example, and other countries, we would have asked the participating states how they would want to participate. And there are some countries that have volunteered to sit on this group, and then there will be broader consultations as well. And then of course, the communication in terms of the roles and responsibilities, so that we can be able to understand from a sectoral basis what is required. The other thing I just want to highlight is that we need to ensure that those national committees are operational, because that is the modality for having the appropriate coordination. I know also there are projects coming on stream that will be looking at what are those broad areas that can benefit from a regional public good solidarity across the region to solving persistent problems. So I would say we are working to understand the issues better through these working groups that we're setting up, and reaching out to countries to have them be involved and share their experiences. So we have Caribbean specific solutions coming out of this. And then also I would very much point you to the establishment of those committees or the operation, their functionality to be able to feed up into the national system and through the CTO also, as to those particular areas that can benefit from a regional response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And in fact, we will hear today from the experience of the Bahamas and Jamaica as it relates to the tourism emergency management committees and their experiences in that regard. So thank you once again. And I know you have to leave us. So heartfelt thanks to CDEMA for being a key partner as it relates to preparedness and resilience in the various efforts of CTO and CHTA and all members.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, I now welcome the second presenter, Ms. Jodi Ann Petrie, who is a technical officer at the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. Ms. Petrie is a Jamaican national and has a background in meteorology management and natural resources management. Welcome, Ms. Petrie, and over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. I will go ahead now and share my screen. Good morning, everyone. Today I will be taking you through what the wet/hurricane season for the Caribbean region for 2022 will look like. And to begin, we usually want to give you a little bit of idea of what do we usually see during the wet season. So what are we expecting in the coming months? And the Caribbean wet season generally it lasts between May/June to November. And we know that the wet season has a wetter half. The second half of the wet season is the wetter half. And the wet season largely coincides with the Atlantic hurricane season, which lasts from June to November. And the Caribbean heat season, which lasts from April/May to October. Now, I would like to know that across the region, we have varying, the different regions within the regions, the sub-regions, have different wet seasons. So for example, in the Bahamas and the Greater Antilles, we have their wet season starting late April/May, and it runs up to October/November. In Belize and much of the Lesser Antilles, their wet season starts in May or June, and it runs up to November or December. In the coastal Guyanas, they have two wet seasons actually. And the first one is from May to July / early August, and the second wet season runs from November to early February. In the southern interior of the Guyanas, their wet season is May to August, and in the ABC Islands, their wet season runs from October to January. Now, we have seen what we usually expect during these months. So how will it look different this year? To take you through that, we would first like to, we want to start by giving you an understanding of what is driving the climate for this season. So we have unusually warm sea surface temperatures across most of the Caribbean Sea and the subtropical North Atlantic. Now, when we have these unusually warm sea surface temperatures, we have a boost in heat. We also have a boost in humidity, and we have increasing hurricane season activity and flood potential in the northern parts of the region. We also have another factor driving the seasonal climate, and that is a persisting weak La Nina throughout the wet/hurricane season. When we have the La Nina conditions, we usually experience in this region, we usually experience a boost in rainfall. We have an increase in the hurricane season activity and flood potential. But note that the existence of the La Nina usually tempers the heat. So let us begin with the outlook for the season. We're going to look now at the rainfall. So how wet will the next 3 to 6 months be? And we usually, when we're explaining the outlooks, what we usually do is break the season into two parts. So we have the first half of the season and then the second half of the season. So the first half is from June to August, and then the second half is from September to November. So how wet will the first half of the season be? And to make it a little simpler for persons, I will just speak to the colors, because colors, persons understand colors a little bit more than when you start to talk about percentage. So for simplicity, when we look at these maps, the deeper the color, so the deeper the blue or the deeper the brown, is the higher the confidence, the higher forecast confidence. So let us look at the early part of the wet season, and we are looking at the deeper blue in the Guyanas, and that deeper blue is an indication. So we have a higher confidence of normal to above normal rainfall in these areas. And another example would be the Hispaniola. You see that we're looking right here on the left-hand side of the screen. You can see that it is in blue, but it is a lighter blue. So the conditions are still forecasted to be normal to above normal, but the confidence is a little lower than what we would see for Guyana, which has a deeper blue. The Guyana, sorry, which has a deeper blue. And so we have those areas being above normal to above normal, and then the areas that we're seeing here in brown, we forecast for those areas to be normal to below normal. And when we say normal, what we mean is the usual conditions that are expected during that period of time, which is June to August. And where you see there are no colors, that indicates that the conditions are usually what is usual for that period. So you would prepare, in your preparedness, you would prepare based on what you usually expect to see during that time. And we go now and we look at the September to November, we're seeing a lot more blues. So that means higher confidence for normal to above normal rainfall in the areas that you can see having the blue colors. And in the Bahamas and Cayman Islands, for example, we're seeing normal to below normal rainfall in those areas. Now we are looking at the flood potential for the season. And again, I will use the colors because persons identify more with colors, and the deeper the color is, the higher the chance for us to have a very wet spell. So we are expecting to see at least 3 to 6 wet spells to occur from June to August, with 1 to 3 of them ending up in a very wet spell. And we can see a little bit of blue right over the Guyanas. We're expecting an increase in the number of wet spells in these areas. And then we have now, if you look over, just giving you an example, if you look at Belize, or you see my mouse is hovering over, we're expecting a little bit of a decrease in the number of wet spells that are expected throughout that period. Now let's talk about drought. And if we, again, look at the colors, we usually break the drought up into short-term droughts and long-term droughts. And the short-term droughts, we usually take that up to the end of August, and the long-term drought until the end of November. Now, if you have a look at the map on the left, which is a short-term drought map, we are seeing, and then if we take a look now at the alert levels, we're looking at no concern for drought in much of the region, except for Martinique, which you can see will be under a drought watch. And if we now look at the right-hand side of that image at the long-term drought, we are seeing by the end of November, we have no concerns for long-term drought across the region. Now let's have a look at heat. So how hot will the next 3 to 6 months be? Again, similar to the rainfall maps, the deeper the color is the higher the confidence. And if we have a look at the maps, we're seeing that nighttime, so nighttime temperatures, we can see they're on the right, and that's for both the early and late wet season. And the nighttime and daytime temperatures are expected to warm throughout the season, and we expect that because it coincides with the Caribbean heat season. However, the daytime temperatures may be warmer than usual for Cayman Islands and Trinidad and Tobago from June to August. And the usual, when we say usual, we say what is normally expected throughout that season, are slightly cooler daytime temperatures for most from September to November. Now let's have a look at heat waves. And we are looking here at the map, and just to give a little bit of context, the color that we're seeing is a lot of the darker blues across much of the region. And what this means is that we're expecting marginal conditions for heat waves throughout this period. And what that means simply is that we are not expecting the season to be as hot as the record-breaking 2020 heat season, or even as hot as the 2021 heat season. So the conditions are expected to be moderate to marginal for this upcoming heat season. So now let's get into what do we expect for the Atlantic hurricane season? How active will the season be? And the forecast for the season is that we are expecting an active hurricane season. If we have a look at the forecasts right across different organizations, so we have the CSU, we have the Tropical Storm Risk, we have NOAA Prediction, Climate Prediction Center, and CIMH's very own Atlantic Outlook forecast. Now, if we look at what we usually expect, so the climatology, the number of named storms is usually around 14. What we're looking at for the forecast, all of the organizations predicted a higher number of named storms for the season. As it relates to hurricanes, usually expect around 7. All of the institutions are predicting a higher number of hurricanes for this season. And the same goes for major hurricanes, along with the accumulated cyclone energy. Again, CSU, Tropical Storm Risks, NOAA, and CIMH predict a higher accumulated cyclone energy across the season. So overall, an active hurricane season. And if we just briefly have a look at, a comparison, what we're expecting to see throughout this season, and for example, the record-breaking 2020 and 2017 hurricane seasons, and just to give a little bit of a context, say for instance, we look at the accumulated cyclone energy. For 2020, the observed accumulated cyclone energy was about 180, and those were that we had about 30 named storms during that time. And for this year, we're seeing 19 named storms, and the accumulated cyclone energy is just about 160. Just to give an indication of how we expect the season to be in comparing to what we would have seen in some of the record-breaking years. And this is just giving you a list of the named storms for the season. And now I'm just going to go through a little bit of the summary of what we just saw. So we expect that heat discomfort will increase towards August, given that we are in our heat season, and heat stress will peak during heat waves. However, they're not likely to be as hot as recent years. We are expecting to see, I should say this summary that I'm giving is for the first half of the wet season. So moving on, we are looking at progressively stronger tropical cyclone activity as the season progresses into August. Flash flood and long-term flooding potential will increase from moderate to high by August in the islands, but should remain high in the Guyanas. Now, although we saw a lot of green saying no concern on the drought maps, we are aware that there are some countries that are currently in drought, and they may still see impacts in the early portions of the period. But as the rainfall increases towards the end of August, we're expecting to see some short-term drought relief for those countries or those areas that are in drought currently. And the summary for the second half, which is the wetter half of the season, we're expected to see strong tropical cyclone activity through October, and likely a more active than normal hurricane season. Heat stress is expected to peak in September, with cooler temperatures expected from November, when the heat discomfort should sharply decrease. And again, it's not expected to be as hot as recent years. The potential for flooding and flash flooding is high and should be of particular concern if the La Nina persists. And again, region-wide long-term drought is not expected to be a major concern by the end of November. And stay tuned as we update this information on a monthly basis, and you can see that those updates on the RCC page on the CIMH's website. So the key messages to take away: tropical cyclone activity above average, particularly high during the peak of the season, August to October. Potential for flash floods, high impact, heat impact potential peaking in October, but not expected to be as high as recent years. Prepare for floods and cascading hazards. Frequency of tropical cyclone higher than average. A decrease in the frequency of dry spells, and heat stress peaking between August to October. And this is where, as the practitioners, we need you guys to help us, because you carry out your daily activities, and you would, based on what you would have heard from the forecast, have an idea of some of the possible implications for your sector. But we did prepare a few. So we have possible disruptions to airline schedules and possible damage to tourism infrastructure as a result of the forecasted above average hurricane season activity, particularly through October. Tourism practitioners also expect to see an increase in the demand for cooling as the heat season peaks. Also, we are advising persons to apply sunscreen, preferably reef safe when going out, as the UV index will be high to very high on sunny days. On a positive note, ocean temperatures are not expected to be as warm as to trigger coral bleaching. And therefore, this time would be a good time for persons to engage in coral reef restoration activities, especially for destinations where there's an ongoing program or partnership between tourism practitioners and coastal managers. To keep yourself updated, you can check out within your respective countries, your national Met services. They are your go-to partner for most local climate information. We will give you a regional outlook, but if you want to have or hone in more on your country, you can check the websites of your national meteorological services. And if you want to know a little bit more about the implications for the tourism sector, we have the Tourism Climatic Bulletin that is issued jointly between CIMH, CHTA, and CTO. And of course, again, we have quite a number of bulletins that are coming out at the national level, so you can also keep up to date with those bulletins. And I thank you. Amanda, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jodi Ann, for that comprehensive presentation. We move now to, well, I take the opportunity to welcome the next presenter, Mr. Osbourne Chin, who is the Monitoring and Evaluation Analyst at the Ministry of Tourism of Jamaica, who will be sharing some best practices in the Jamaica context as it relates to the work of the private sector. And Mr. Chin has been employed at the ministry for over 12 years. And in that regard, he has a strong background and extensive experience in environmental and natural resources management, climate change, and disaster risk management. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Chin, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Please allow me to share my screen.
You are co-host, Mr. Chin. You can share your screen.
Okay, thank you. Give me one quick second. I'm having a little bit of a...
Are you seeing the green small?
Yes, I am.
Right, click on that, and then Zoom will open a window in which your apps, all the apps you have running on your computer will be shown. You can select PowerPoint. There you go. Yep, we're seeing it.
Okay, great. Second. Something just happened just now.
If you'd like, Mr. Chin, you can email me your presentation. I'll run it from here. You're muted. I can't hear you.
Sure, I can do that. Can you provide me with the email so I can just send it across?
Yes.
So perhaps in the essence of time, we can have the presentation by Mrs. Suzanne Pattusch. I know she is queued and ready. And then we'll come back to you, Mr. Chin, and yours will be the final presentation for the day.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah?
Okay, I'll share my screen, and you have mine just in case, because I'm not good in this technology. So let me do this. But okay, do you see it?
Yes, I believe, yes. So it is my pleasure to welcome Mrs. Suzanne Pattusch, who is the Executive Vice President at the Bahamas Hotel and Tourism Association. She will be sharing the experiences from a private sector perspective and an agency that also supports private sector activities. So welcome, Mrs. Pattusch, and over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for having me here with this esteemed group of panelists. So just by way of a background, the Bahamas Hotel and Tourism Association, and I'm going to make sure I spell out all the acronyms. Thanks, Frank, for reminding me because we have many. We play an important role as a private sector partner in the nation's efforts to ensure we're best prepared for any disaster, be it hurricane or other weather event or otherwise, and also equipped to effectively respond to and recover from a disaster. So we're a private sector partner. I'm going to be speaking from a private sector point of view, but I'm also going to be, you'll notice, stressing the partner side of things, because if there's one thing we've learned, and I think Dr. Nicole, you did definitely point out that we have absolutely seen our fair share of hurricanes of late, and it is key to emphasize that collaboration and cohesion in the private and public sector, both domestically and internationally, has been key to our success in being able to effectively respond and react and recover. So we sit on NEMA's, and NEMA stands for National Emergency Management Agency of the Bahamas. They're the overarching agency that engages a comprehensive disaster management coordinating activities. They have, and I'm going to say 14 of them, but please don't quote me on that. What they're called is ESF, Emergency Support Function Groups, and we sit on number 12, which is specific oversight over the tourism industry and our ability to respond, react to, recover from any disaster. The Ministry of Tourism leads our ESF 12 sector, our group, but we sit on it alongside a cadre of other public and private sector persons. Again, partnership, collaboration. We sit with Airport Authority, Broadcast Corporation, Information Services, Civil Aviation, the Department of Meteorology, Port Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Immigration, and NAD. So it does definitely take a village. So I am going to, and I for some reason got this up, but I'm going to go through the specifics. Now, of course, I'm going to talk about our interaction in the face of Dorian, obvious reasons, top of mind. But this is commonplace. This is how we do things for the other hurricanes that we have faced. You mentioned some of them, Joaquin, I should say, so the different pronunciation, Matthew, Irma, et cetera, et cetera. The BHTA, alongside the cadre of people that we just listed, is very key and very concentrated on being able to ensure that the tourism sector is ready. We send out every single year the Bahamas Hurricane Kit, which is compiled by the Bahamas Ministry of Tourism with help from organizations as ourselves and other agencies, a BHTA Hurricane Preparedness Plan, Readiness and Procedures Manual, updated insurance readiness, and an emergency shelter list. Now, you know, I will say that our destination, our nation, you know, has quite a robust plan. But Frank, I think you said it before, where it's like, you know, you can never be ready enough. So to be able to, you know, ensure that your emergency coordinating committee has met, and from a private sector, you know, point of view, that people are new, and obviously we've, you know, now we've gone through COVID, so representatives may have changed. Make sure that you understand and are aware, so it is natural, it is intrinsic in your ability to activate in the face of a potential threat, a disaster readiness and response plan. For our part, we ask for all the contacts all the time, because, you know, we are a key liaison between the private sector and the public sector when we're communicating with, you know, in the advance of or in the threat of a hurricane, and as it's, if it moves through our archipelago. Another thing, and I think this was Frank with his other cap on, but I got to commend the insurance assessment. You know, we work to ensure and to educate and put forth in front of our members and others, you have to make sure that you are adequately covered to meet the anticipated needs where and when possible. Of course, the structural assessment and sustainability measures. Our hotels, our tourism stakeholders are very work well in that regard. There are some new things that we're finding as we're coming in, and we actually sit on a team. We've got some initiatives surrounding what can we do from an environmental standpoint. Both in Grand Bahama and Abaco, our mangrove population was decimated. How can we replenish that, because mangroves are a very natural buffer against hurricanes, as many I'm sure of you know in the room. In fact, our sailors and our boaters, often they go and take their hurricanes in these islands and park them in the mangrove estuaries, just so that they know it's better protected from a local perspective. As I said, we serve as the communication link. We work with all of our private and public sector partners in order to get the word out. Once the command center is activated by the Bahamas Ministry of Tourism's ESF 12 and the ESF 12 team, we hunker down in a room in a hotel, and we are communicating at all times. We receive the what we call BHTA, eye of the storm. That is via Ministry of Tourism from the Bahamas Department of Meteorology. And that is communicated to the widest possible group so that people are aware of the path of the storm. I will show you a graphic afterwards, which really does speak to how things can change almost, overnight or in a matter of days. So this kind of information for our hotels, our tourism stakeholders, our shelters, our partners to be able to understand where the storm is, how intense it is. This is an example that is issued by our Department of Meteorology. This is Dorian. This was the first alert that we sent out August 27th, 2019 at 2 p.m. This is when Dorian was a tropical storm, and it was moving into the Eastern Caribbean Sea. And it speaks to which islands are under the threat of just a tropical storm, etc. It talks about the forecasted track. It says where the intensity of it, 50 miles an hour. Boy, things changed very quickly. So this is on the left-hand side. You'll notice that was the graphic. We pull down NOAA's graphic and send it along with the Department of Meteorology. I think, Jodi, you said, pictures, colors, etc. says 1,000 words. This is something as well to be able to accompany the reading. And if you notice on alert number 1 on the left-hand side, 27th of August, this is where the storm was tracking. And then you see mere days later, 5 days later on the 31st, this is where the storm was when it was basically moving towards Abaco and Grand Bahama. So the other information we send out is from the Bahamas Ministry of Tourism. So it's key and important to understand as part of this collaboration, cohesive, to have a unified voice. So one thing that we do alert our hotel tourism sectors to that we know is we have one voice speak on behalf of the nation when it comes to public announcements, etc. We send out things from the Bahamas Department of Meteorology in terms of where the storm is, but in terms of public messaging. And, Frank, you were so right. Part of what we do is to try to say, we are devastated about the people that are being affected, but 100%, and we're a microcosm of the Caribbean, where we've had it where you have people that don't understand the geography of the Caribbean that believe that one island is all islands in the Caribbean. Well, it's intensified and very, in our archipelago alone. So this Ministry of Tourism reports is key to sit there and say, number one, we are, absolutely devastated, deeply concerned. And you'll notice it in here about our neighbors, the Abacos and Grand Bahama. However, we are 700 islands and keys spread over 100,000 square miles. With Dorian, Nassau was, other than the fact that our sister islands were, being pummeled, Nassau was not. And, our airports remained open, our ports remained open for the most part, and we had to convey that. Our hotels were still able to operate, etc. And thankfully so, we were the center for the evacuations, which we'll go to in a little bit. So these are some examples of the communication that we sent out from our sole voice. We send out, this is our national carrier. Whilst we do encourage And like we said, all of our hotels, all of our tourism stakeholders have their own plan. We do encourage people to check their own, JetBlue, American Airlines for leaving the islands in the threat of the storm, et cetera. But we do send out our national carrier notices, et cetera. In the end, the ESF 12 will receive the all clear. And I think Carmel's on the phone, and I don't know, I know Sharon, et cetera, and many other Bahamians, but you guys can all, I'm sure, commiserate or well understand when I say this was probably one of the most welcome alerts, the last alert. It is moved out of the Bahamas. And that was on I had the storm number 52, September 2nd, that they received that, or 4th, excuse me, that we received that. So we will communicate that. And then immediately upon the passing of the storm, so we've gone from approach, we've gone to impact. The BHTA again, and I cannot stress this enough, with a plethora of people assisting. In this case with Dorian, I've seen many incidences where private and public sector persons work together, but this was probably one of the most effective means. We had private sector move to a private airport, as well as other public locations were deployed in order to receive the thousands of people that had to come in from the 2 islands that were most impacted. And the BHTA did what we could, working with NEMA and all of their underlying agencies, to be able to receive and home and house these and put them in shelters so that they could catch themselves. And that was our role in that regard. The next thing that we moved very closely into, and I'm sure many of you guys understand, you guys have been part of the relief efforts for us and vice versa, I'm sure, in many of the other instances where island nations have been hit with hurricanes. The inpouring of national assistance, Caribbean assistance, was unbelievable with Dorian, more so than any other hurricane we've seen. But that takes coordination to be able to receive that, the contingency order is released, et cetera. So, we had a variety of organizations reach out to us, and I have to put them up. A picture says 1,000 words, from all over the country, all over other country, internationals, Canada, US, Europe, et cetera. And all they wanted to do is help. How do I help? What can I send? That is a key role in ensuring that organizations are able to receive, process, deploy. Where we had all the people coming in being evacuated, we actually needed food supplies in Nassau, New Providence, as well as the 2 islands that were impacted. Carmel will well remember the organization that helped Food Kitchen, World Food Kitchen, I'm thinking she can pop in there and correct me if I'm wrong, who helped with the Feed the Masses in Grand Bahama. Well, we had organizations that flew to Abaco, that went to Abaco, drinking water, that came here, that helped to set up food centers and the ability to be able to feed and replenish the shelters with food, as well as distribution centers. So both international, locally. We had donations, Sandals donating a number of vehicles, all-terrain vehicles, because it was near impassable and remains so for many moons in the islands that were hit. Solar generation, places that went out to the most remote areas and set up solar generation. And this is post, when it was traversable. And then, of course, the distribution of food for both local far shelters, as well as individuals that were displaced that simply needed. Here, and again, CHTA and all the other organizations, I gotta have my hats off to the Caribbean. Our regional brothers and sisters really came and unified to assist us. So this is another example. So we moved to the response recovery, all the NGOs, all of the NEMA, literally getting people out of roofs, etc. That was paramount. And then you get into that's the immediate. Then afterwards, you get into the how do you feed, how do you take care of the people that are displaced or that aren't, or that are on still on island. Then you move into, listen, how do we position ourselves from a messaging standpoint to talk about the reality. And that's another key aspect of what we participated in with, again, all of the individuals, all the representative agencies, Ministry of Tourism, promotion boards, BOYPB, GBITB, Grand Bahama Island Tourism Board, NASA Preparedness Promotion Board. We met to discuss how do we collectively, in a unified voice, speak to our nation about what has happened. And in this case, we were cohesive in the messaging, heralding the strength and resilience of the Bahamas as efforts were underway to build and restore. We did say, make sure they understood the majority of the islands in the archipelago are ready, willing, and able to welcome visitors. It was key that we still had, where possible, the influx of tourism dollars to be able to help us. In addition to all of the things that were being donated, the jeeps, the food, the tents, all of that, we needed our economies to continue. So we were very much cohesive in our messaging to say, hey, you know, we're going to build back better together, but these are the places that are still ready and willing to welcome you with open arms. So we were part of that. And last but not least, and I know that we're going to go into some questions about lessons learned, et cetera. The one message, and I think it was very key, the president in December 2019 kind of spoke about it. And again, this is the importance of the collaboration and cohesion of the people. And, you know, it was everything from churches, et cetera, to come together to be able to respond to crises. You know, we had neighbors rescuing neighbors on jet skis. You know, we had, you know, all of the entities, Royal Bahamas Defense Force, NEMA, Coast Guard, et cetera, risking life and limb to go into areas that were challenged and not traversable, to make, you know, to have rescues that were unfathomable prior. And finally, in the end, you know, we knew that going forward out of this, we had to have the mental, physical, spiritual, emotional capacity to see beyond it and then continue to recover. So, you know, this was our lessons learned. You know, how do we build upon those alliances? How do we enshrine them? How do we make it so that whilst every hurricane is different, that we have those things in place that we know helped us succeed in our efforts to do what we could do to mitigate the damage. So that's it for me.
Excellent. Thank you very much again to Mrs. Suzanne Pattusch for sharing the experiences of the Bahamas, and particularly in the aftermath of the deadly Hurricane Dorian in 2019. With this, I am now pleased to welcome back Mr. Osbourne Chin from the Ministry of Tourism of Jamaica. Over to you, Mr. Chin.
Thank you, Amanda. Just confirming that you can now see the presentation.
Yes, perfectly.
Awesome. Right, good morning again, fellow panelists and participants. I am quite excited to be able to participate in this learning session as part of the preparedness actions of the region for the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season. And of course, Jamaica, along with our partners and our colleagues, we join the regional effort in recognizing the importance of disaster preparedness in the tourism sector. And as we've heard before, how important it is. And so we are grateful for this opportunity to share our approach and our best practices as it relates to disaster risk management in the sector. So we are all aware that our unique geographical location makes us particularly vulnerable to multiple hazards, particularly hurricanes, meteorological hazards, landslides, floods, coastal storms, surges, geological hazards, earthquakes, tsunamis, and of course, our biological hazards that we are currently experiencing in terms of pandemics, epidemics, and vector-borne diseases. And also other disruptions such as cyber attacks, economic recessions, civil unrests, and wars, all of which we've either seen or experienced in recent years. And so many of these hazards are also exacerbated by climate change. And because tourism is, by its very nature, highly climate sensitive and a heavy user of our natural resources, it stands to be significantly impacted if adequate measures are not put in place. And so just to give a bit of a background in terms of disaster risk management and tourism in Jamaica, we have for several decades been mainstreaming disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management into our tourism policies and plans. And as far back as the early 2000s, Jamaica has been undertaking initiatives to address hazards in the tourism sector, albeit with a heavy focus on hurricane preparedness back then. Prior to 2006, we would have developed SOPs for hurricane preparedness. We also organized things like drills and simulations in partnership with our Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, the ODPEM. They would also conduct a number of non-structural vulnerability assessments of our hotels and deliver lectures prior to the start of the season. And of course, our airports and our seaports would conduct their own assessments and simulation exercises. Now, after 2006, however, the Ministry of Tourism began taking a more proactive approach to disaster management by taking on a multi-hazard approach. And so we established a formal partnership with the ODPEM, and we adopted the then OAS CDEMA multi-hazard contingency planning manual for the Caribbean tourism sector. And this document guided the establishment of our own institutional framework for DRM in the sector. In 2009, we developed an influenza pandemic plan in response to the H1N1 outbreak, and many of you will remember that. And this document actually helped us quite a lot in crafting our response and our protocols to the current COVID-19 pandemic. So that was very, very good in bridging that gap. We also participated in a number of regional initiatives surrounding disaster management in the tourism sector. And so, in fact, we were actually one of the 5 pilot countries under the Regional Public Good Project, the Disaster Management for Sustainable Tourism in the Caribbean. And we adopted then the Regional Disaster Management and Climate Change Strategy for the tourism sector with the assistance of CTO and CDEMA. And so we prepared our own strategy for the tourism sector in Jamaica. But since then, the National Disaster Risk Management Act was revised in 2015, and the ministry also revised our own framework for disaster risk management in the tourism sector. This revised framework document now acts as the main tool for planning, managing, monitoring, and implementing disaster risk management activities in the sector. And the framework looks at the coordination and institutional arrangements in the tourism sector, as well as the linkages with other sectors at all levels. So the regional level, the national level, the sectoral level, the destination area level, and of course, at the entity level. And so specifically, the framework itself addresses 4 main areas. Like I said before, the institutional arrangements, which includes the policy and legislative frameworks that govern disaster risk management nationally as well as in the sector. It also examines the efforts for planning through the Tourism Emergency Management Committee, which I will speak a little bit more about later in the presentation. It also looks at the mechanisms in place for implementation at all levels. It also looks at the requirements for doing our disaster risk management planning, which includes the preparation of comprehensive disaster risk management plans for destination areas as well as for tourism enterprises. It looks at the requirements for conducting disaster risk assessments, and the preparation of these assessments will inform the development and implementation of our comprehensive disaster risk management plans. And lastly, it looks at the coordination efforts for response and crisis communication, and it examines the role of the Tourism Emergency Operations Center in the disaster response, as well as the requirements for conducting post-disaster needs assessments, damage assessments, and also examines the role of the ministry and the Jamaica Tourist Board in the development of a crisis communication strategy for the tourism sector. Now, in terms of the Tourism Emergency Management Committee, the Ministry of Tourism here in Jamaica understands that the successful implementation of any strategy that has to do with disaster risk management or disaster risk reduction requires a systematic approach to managing these disasters for an effective and proactive response. It looks to build resilience, it looks to reduce risks, it looks to improve preparedness, to fast track recovery, as well as to provide an environment that is healthy, safe, and secure for both tourists as well as our residents. And so to achieve this, we established the Tourism Emergency Management Committee. And this committee, I think it's pretty uniform across the region. It is a collaborative partnership that includes both the public and private sector, that it involves the Ministry of Tourism, and our public bodies, the Jamaica Tourist Board or Tourism Product Development Company, Tourism Enhancement Fund, among others. It also includes the wider tourism industry. The Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association plays a very, very key role in that. In fact, they actually chair the committee and the ministry acts as co-chair. And I will show you a little bit of a graphic to show that. The overall goal, though, of the TEMC is to build a resilient tourism industry with the ability to quickly bounce back and to coordinate effectively in the event of any emergency, so as to reduce loss of life and damage to property, damage to any economic, social, and physical environmental assets caused by any hazards and disasters. And so specifically, the TEMC seeks to improve the sector-wide management of all hazards. It seeks to strengthen the tourism sector's capacity to coordinate and communicate with emergency response agencies for risk assessment, for things like efficient early warning systems, as well as for continued monitoring that require collaboration to support disaster mitigation efforts, as well as to effect a well-targeted response and recovery activities. And so it also looks to facilitate networks and clusters of tourism entities who can respond more quickly and effectively to any emergencies, especially those localized emergencies. The TEMC also assists with mainstreaming disaster management into our policies and plans. And it also looks to formulate and implementing disaster risk reduction measures that also link back to climate change adaptation, because we understand that climate change and disaster risk management go hand in hand, and that goes hand in hand to ensure that we have a sustainable tourism product. It also looks to enhance disaster preparedness of the sector and to improve the responsiveness to these major hazards in a manner that is both collective, fast, and reliable through common operational procedures and mechanisms. We look to develop technical capacities and organizational capacities of our subsectors, because we want them to be able to lead, to coordinate, and to manage the post-disaster recovery process as effectively as possible. We also look to foster close partnerships and more collaborative initiatives at all levels, including with our disaster agencies, our tourism private sector, civil society, the academia, our universities, the police, in order to promote disaster resilience in the sector from both a national all the way down to the entity level. And lastly, we look to enhance the disaster consciousness and awareness of the local population by instilling a culture of safety and resilience. And we do that through our public awareness programs. Now, in terms of the structure of the TEMC, like I mentioned before, it's a very simple structure. It consists of a chair and a co-chair. In the past, the ministry was usually the chair of the committee, and the JHTA, the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association, would be one of the permanent members. Since our restructuring of our framework, we've seen the need to have the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association be a co-chair in the process. And so they will then have a greater stake in the process. They will be able to have a greater buy-in and to be able to lead the process. And so we took this approach to ensure that the sector has a significant role, again, in the planning process. And the ministry will also act as the secretariat for the committee. And the membership of the committee is comprised of both permanent members as well as co-opted members. And I will share those with you right now. So these members, and you will see the list here on the left. And then the co-opted members are those members who we can call upon if we do need their assistance. However, generally speaking, the co-opted members are always included in our communication processes. In terms of the roles and responsibilities, like I mentioned earlier, the chair and the co-chair is responsible for providing the leadership and oversight to the committee. And the ministry acts as the secretariat in an advisory role to the committee and executes the administrative functions. We develop the work plan for the TEMC. We prepare all the reports, and we do the monitoring and the evaluation of all the activities of the committee. And the general membership, those persons would essentially articulate the issues and make recommendations and provide any technical expertise, as well as to implement specific actions as necessary based on where they sit. And the working groups are established as necessary to undertake specific tasks. For example, things like shelter management. You can have a shelter management working group or an evacuation working group, or a working group to work out things like mutual aid agreements or MOUs between properties or between organizations or agencies. So in terms of best practices, what we've been doing over the years to essentially drive our process, we partner with key agencies to do things like capacity building and training. We've developed a number of plans and templates and guidelines for the sector. We conduct a number of simulation exercises and drills. We prepare specific destination area disaster risk management plans. And we also designate specific officers as tourism disaster coordinators. And of course, our Tourism Emergency Operations Center remains a best practice. In terms of each, like I said before, we do partner with our key agencies to administer the training or training program for both the public and the private sector tourism stakeholders. And we provide training in things like emergency operations center procedures, damage and loss assessment, post-disaster needs assessment, and emergency telecoms. And these training are directly for our public sector persons like myself and persons at the Jamaica Tourist Board, who play a key part in the functioning of the Tourism Emergency Operations Center. And for the sector, we provide hurricane preparedness training. We do business continuity planning training as well. We do help them to prepare their emergency and disaster plans, and we also do a number of sensitization sessions where earthquakes and tsunamis are concerned. In terms of plans and templates, we have conducted quite detailed surveys of the tourism sector to determine, one, their level of preparedness, and two, the extent to which they have plans in place to address disasters or emergencies. And so coming out of those surveys, we then prepared a number of templates, one specifically a disaster risk management plan template, as well as a business continuity planning guidebook for the sector. And we've also provided training to tourism trainers to assist the sector with using the templates to prepare their plans. Like I mentioned earlier, we also conducted a number of simulation exercises and drills in the different destination areas, both desktop drills as well as functional drills, the objective of which is to test the elements of response, preparedness, their plans, as well as the protocols for evacuation. And the results of these exercises are usually used to inform the development of the specific disaster risk management plans for the specific disaster destination area. In terms of these destination area disaster risk management plans, what these do is to provide an organized and coordinated approach towards managing hazards. And it also addressed the coordination arrangements for things like risk identification, risk analysis, mitigation, response, recovery, as well as preparedness. And so the elements relating to evacuation, sheltering, communication, all of those things are covered under those specific destination area disaster risk management plans. Now, the Ministry of Tourism has in place what we call a destination assurance framework, which aims to ensure that Destination Jamaica lives up to the standard and exceeds its brand promise and provides, one, a world-class tourism destination that is both safe, seamless, and secure. And under this framework, we have designated destination managers to each destination area to address specific destination area level issues, such as safety and security, compliance and standards, quality control, environmental sustainability, as well as disaster management. And these managers, they sit on the local parish committees for disaster management, and they're also assigned as tourism disaster coordinators with the responsibility of doing things like training. They report back and forth between the ministry and the sector and the persons on the ground. They also conduct our initial damage assessments out of the Tourism Emergency Operations Center, just to name a few things that they do. Speaking of the Emergency Operations Center, the establishment and activation of the TIOC, as we call it, during the response and recovery phase, this is managed and operated by the Ministry of Tourism, and we coordinate the sector's response during all emergencies and disasters. And the TIAC has both a communication as well as an operational function in ensuring that information is disseminated to the sector and that contact is maintained with our overseas offices, that contact is maintained with the National Emergency Operations Center, the Parish Emergency Operations Centers. And of course, the TIAC also serves in mobilizing resources and personnel where needed. And it also serves to issue bulletins and other information to the sector, similar to what we saw earlier in the Bahamas presentation. And in terms of the lessons learned and going forward, we do recognize that there is a strong need for more detailed hazard, risk, and vulnerability assessments that will be used to guide the development of disaster plans at the destination area level and the entity level. Right now, we have these assessments done more at a large scale, and they're not necessarily drilled down to specific areas. So we need a greater resolution for these assessments to be done. There is greater need, again, like I said before, for specific hazard maps for these specific areas. We need to have more access to risk transfer options, especially for those tourism operators who fall in the micro, small, medium, or even the informal categories. It's very important to establish mutual aid agreements among our tourism operators, as well as among our agencies and our sectors. And also having an updated and tested disaster plan is very, very critical, both at the sector level as well as at the entity level, because that is what is going to help us to be prepared. And lastly, awareness, training, and capacity building is extremely critical. This part of the mitigation and preparedness process is one that we are focused on, and we've always been focused on going forward. So those are just a few things that we are currently doing here in Jamaica, and we continue to do. And so I hope you all found this very useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chin. Indeed, the model of a Tourism Emergency Management Committee and the Tourism Emergency Operating Center is a regional best practice that we would like all countries to adopt. So thank you for sharing the experiences of Jamaica in that regard and the template. And certainly, I would be very happy for any countries that don't already have an established tourism emergency management committee. I would be happy to connect you with colleagues in Jamaica so you can perhaps learn from and adopt that model. So we are over time, but this is so important. So I'm kindly requesting for you to indulge us for just a few more minutes. We will have a moderated panel discussion. We only have time for perhaps one question for each panelist. The session will be moderated by Mr. Frank Camito. And after that, we will have some brief concluding remarks. So I would like to welcome all our panelists, Ms. Jodi Ann Petrie and Teddy Allen from CIMH, Mr. Osbourne Chin from the Ministry of Tourism of Jamaica, and Mrs. Suzanne Pattusch from the Bahamas Hotel and Tourism Association. If you can turn on your cameras, your microphones, and I will hand over to Frank at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda, and thank you to each of you. There was great substance in each of your presentations, and attendees should know that you'll be able to tap into it. Amanda and team will make these available. But I just, and particularly Osbourne, your last slide on lessons learned was really very good and instructional for us. But I have a question for each of you, just in the interest of time, and then, you know, if the audience has any questions, please chime in. We'll try to get those in. We're just spending a few minutes on this, but it's important. What are each of you doing now, right now, in terms of readiness? And if you had your wish list, what can you do better? What's your top thing that you'd like to do better next time in the future? So well, let's round robin that. What are you doing now, right now, in terms of readiness and as an organization, and what can you do better next time?
I don't know if you will. I'll be very brief in my responses to Bahamas, Frank. And I just want to notice, because I'm anxious also to say, we have Trevor Moss in the house, and I have to recognize him. He is from the Bahamas Ministry of Tourism. And this man has sat in the seat next to me on the ESF 12 from a private sector standpoint, from the lead industry, Bahamas Ministry of Tourism. So I want to recognize him, in addition to Carmel, who's been on the panel or on the in the attendees for a while. So very quickly, for us, our role as always remains, we do our annual things, which is the distribution of all the information, touching base, making sure that we as an organization are 100% ready with their communications, et cetera, to ensure that we can fulfill our role. And then the ESF, NEMA, et cetera, do the same thing. We have monthly meetings with NEMA, which we all get on board, and there have been some activities that they're engaged on to improve their systems. Of course, I'd rather them speak to it in general. Wish list in terms of what I hope to see, et cetera. There has been one distinct change since the last, since we have last experienced a hurricane, and that is COVID. And, for us, I think it's paramount that we have to take into consideration the, that element, even in term, COVID is, and we can all say it's, we just noticed, I don't know if anyone sitting on this board have just seen that the United States is purportedly removing the test requirement to get back into the US, details to follow. But, the fact is COVID is still around, and us is still, nations that have to deal with the element of it, especially in our family homes. How do we take that in, put that into the mix with us? Large gatherings, putting people together, et cetera. So, for me, I think it is important, absolutely, now that we continue these partnership approaches and then take into consideration what we've learned in the past to be able to apply to the future, even though every hurricane is different. But we cannot ignore that we have had a seismic epic event like COVID that has changed the trajectory of our population, period, into the mix.
Thank you. Who wants to go next?
Sure, I'll go.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for the question, Frank. That's a very, 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 very important question. So right now, right this minute, there is also a session that is going on right now with the Minister of Tourism, and he is currently handing over some of those documents that I mentioned earlier in my presentation. Those disaster risk management resources, the business continuity plan template, disaster risk management plan template and guidelines, those are being handed over now to the sector in a meeting right now with the minister. And so the sector will now have these documents that they can use to update their plans going forward. Also, we will be having our TMC meeting this week, just about now, similar to what we're currently doing with this seminar, which is one to update the sector on the readiness of the tourism sector, to get from them what their level of readiness is. So the CHTA will be presenting to us from across their membership, how ready they are, things that they've been putting in place.
Very good.
We're also working with our local municipalities to help us to identify the high-risk areas in our tourism destination areas as well. It is always ongoing. Every 3 months, every quarter, we would update our emergency contact information to ensure that they remain up to date. We do refresher training with our staff in terms of our emergency operation centers, and we establish our rosters going forward just in case we need to activate our EOCs. So those are some of the things that we're doing right this minute. And if we're supposed to be more proactive, we could have had our meeting in May instead of having it in June, since this season already started. Right.
Yeah. But to that point, Osbourne, do you think it's too late? I don't think it's ever. I mean, well,
no, it's not too
ever,
late. Definitely not too late.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So those of us on the line who have not moved as companies or destinations on our readiness initiatives, our collaborations, and so on, it's still not too late. Yeah. Who wants to go next? Why don't we go with Teddy? How about you? You're standing in for Dr. Greenidge.
For Roche, right. I just wanted to apologize for the noise in the background. I am standing in the last minute, and I had to duck into a cafe due to an existing appointment, so there's some background noise there. But what I would say to your question is that what we're doing is we continue to produce detailed climate information, seasonal outlooks, and adding a sectoral tailored emphasis on that for different categories. But what we would like to do, or the wish list, is to continuously improve the interpretation and the communication of the product, because while we produce information, if it's not interpreted correctly, then it's not used appropriately, and then it's kind of useless. So for example, interpreting a probabilistic forecast, right? 50% probability of being above normal. What does that mean? It's not 50% more than normal, that some people still get confused with. So there are always challenges present on the interpretation and communication of the actual information.
Very good. And Jodi, you want to chime in?
I think Teddy, let me just explain to the audience that we're both from CIMH, so Teddy's supporting with
Right.
a little bit more of the technical questions, but I think he pretty much covered what I would have said.
Very good, very good. And by the way, on the next session, which will be on the 30th of June, we will get into a more granular type of thing. We wanted the broader view today, but we'll actually get into the level where we can speak specifically to communication strategies, to insurance issues, which affect us in a huge way. And there's a lot of readiness and adjustments that need to occur in that, particularly in today's environment, and also to shipping and the supply chain, and how that's so critical, both from a planning and also from a response afterwards point of view, to be tuned into. So we're going to hone in some very specific practical kinds of things that are important from a destination as well as from a company point of view. Amanda, unless you want me to ask any more questions, I'll put it back to you.
Thank you very much. And I think it's time to wrap up. And I really would like to take this opportunity to extend thanks to our partner agencies, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, and CIMH. We produce quarterly the joint Caribbean Tourism Climatic Bulletin with CIMH, and we're very grateful to Jodi Ann Petrie, Dr. Mahan, Teddy, Cedric, and Adrian, etc., who support this effort. In terms of today's webinar, special thanks also to Mrs. Suzanne Pattusch from the Bahamas Hotel and Tourism Association, and Osbourne Chin from the Ministry of Tourism of Jamaica. Thank you for sharing the experiences from your country perspective. In the case of the Bahamas as well, your efforts as it relates to response, recovery, and business continuity post-Hurricane Dorian. Again, I want to highlight the Tourism Emergency Management Committee as a regional best practice. Jamaica has the longest standing and perhaps one of the more established tourism emergency management committees. And again, I would appeal to all countries to consider consulting with your national disaster emergency management agency, and look to establish an agency or a committee rather that would support preparedness as it relates to the tourism sector. Special thanks is also extended to the team at CTO and CHTA who contributed to planning and organizing the webinar. Frank highlighted the second virtual learning session on disaster preparedness, which will be held on June 30th. And again, I'm encouraging everyone to consider joining that discussion. To you, the attendees, thank you very much for your time and your attention. I really hope you found the information beneficial. Our aim is to foster sensitization, awareness, and facilitate the exchange of knowledge and best practices to aid in your own disaster preparedness efforts. So as we prepare and plan for this hurricane season, I really pray it will not be as active, but we know that, the importance of preparedness and mitigation and adaptation can really minimize the impact and allow a country and or a business to have a shorter recovery time. Thanks again, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you all on June 30th. Thanks again.
Thank you for having
Thank you.
me. Thank you. And hi, Michelle Britton from GBI TV. Sorry I didn't see you on the call. Thanks, another partner. All right, everyone, have a safe and blessed day. Thank you. Hi,
Thank you all.
Thank
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye everyone.